Hey everyone, welcome back to another Create with Maxon. How are we all doing? Happy Tuesday. I know it's a little bit strange. We don't normally live stream on a Tuesday for Creative Maxon, but as you know, we've started a brand new series where we're looking at creating perfume ads inside of 3D, specifically, all the Maxon tools really. So last week we took a look at how to model inside of ZBrush, how to model that perfume bottle. Let me actually just put this link in the chat for you. Also, hey to everyone already here. So hey to Sharon, Phil, Arub, how are you guys doing? Nice to see you all. Thanks for joining live. Yeah, don't forget there is a chat section. So if you want to head over, ask your questions, say hi, let us know where you're from. Yeah, everything will be in there. Any links that I talk about will also be in there. And speaking of, there are actually some project files. So if you go to the link of the description of this video, you should find a link, a special Maxon link. And in there are some project files. I put together 4 different files for today. And it's the 4 shots that make up this final animation. And we're basically going to be breaking down some of the animation today. As you can probably imagine, it's basically impossible to do an entire animation or break down the entire animation for you guys in 60 minutes. But, we can go through a few of the tips and tricks and techniques that are shown throughout this animation. And just really quickly, because I haven't actually shown you the final animation yet. We teased it last Wednesday, but we haven't actually shown it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to let you watch it, and then we're going to talk a little bit about it throughout this session. So there we go. Nice and short and sweet, but some simple techniques here. My aim was to basically create a bit of a promo ad for socials based on a perfume ad. It was something I wanted to do to challenge myself. I wanted to do it in a way where it looked good, but was done simply, with the idea of bringing it to Creative Maxon and showing you guys how we can do it. And so today, like I said, is going to be focusing on the motion design, the animation inside of Cinema 4D. And then tomorrow's session is going to be all to do with the lighting, texturing, and rendering inside of Redshift. So we've got back-to-back live streams going on. So a little bit about this. So we are going to be breaking down a lot of techniques, but I wanted to talk a bit about my challenges for this, because it was the first time where I've really had to create a final nice looking animation for something. And what I actually did, I wrote a bit of a fake client brief to give myself a bit of a target. And this was to help me kind of get into the mindset of maybe you guys as freelancers, as artists, designers, or as a studio who probably has to focus a little bit on, a client brief. Whereas normally I just have the freedom of kind of creating whatever I want for a live stream. So this is a really vague version of a client brief where we look at the project title, and it's a bit of an overview. So Made Up Company is launching a luxury perfume campaign for their new fragrance, and they want it to kind of like focus on, timeless beauty, oh God, I can't even say that. Femininity. There we go. Gold accents, petals, crystal clear glass aesthetics. And it goes through a series of kind of objectives, sort of what they would want from this social media reel, engagement on, Instagram and TikTok, etc. The target audience, their interests, some visual elements. So golds, petals, glass, and then tone and mood. And it was nice to be able to actually take a look at a brief and think about how I would then create based on this, instead of just looking at creating. And it kept me on track, but it also created some unexpected challenges. And so, like I said, that's what I want to talk about today, the challenges that I came across and the solutions. And so a lot of it is about finding an idea and turning that into reality. You know, we're all used to kind of this moment when we're kind of just staring at a blank viewport thinking, what am I going to do? What am I going to create? And my process was really just to start creating something. And so let me show you where I began. I'm going to out myself for a little bit because my starting sort of shots and ideas were just getting stuff out there, getting stuff like they say on paper, but in our case, getting some stuff just created inside of 3D. And these were a few of my starting animations. As you can see, they're not exactly where we kind of ended up, but you can kind of see an idea here with the perfume bottle. And a lot of this wasn't using the final models because Ian was in the process of modeling them while I was also in the process of creating animation. So this was using a bit of like a dummy model. So a few of these, you can see a little bit of sort of cloth, some different animation here. And as you can see, not really along the right kind of lines, but it was nice to be able to just throw things down and throw ideas down. And what's funny is the final animation actually uses very similar techniques, just in a very different way. And so having gone through the process of just practicing and seeing what worked, seeing what didn't, it gave me still the ideas and sort of the way to then create the final version or the next version without having the same number of like hiccups and issues to come across. So those were a few of the starting shots. And then we came to a little bit of a closer conclusion. So if I kind of go here, we can see we're getting now a little bit closer to that final animation with this kind of like floating up shot. So it ends up being 4 different shots here, 4 different sort of animations. So this one actually uses simulation. Those of you who know me know I very much love my simulation side of Cinema 4D. But the thing is, this actually came with a few extra issues. Again, you know, we're looking at caching things, we're looking at heavier scene files. And so let me just keep going through these just so you can see an idea of where we've kind of got to from those original shots. So yeah, I tried simulation, but again, we came across some issues. The biggest one being, if we come into some of the footage here, let me just take these 2. So this was the biggest thing I came across. Those of you who follow me on socials would have seen this while I was kind of in the process of creating this final animation. So let me just create a little comp here. So I'm just going to play this through. I'm just going to pull this through so we can see. So this was a first pass, right? It looks okay. Looks okay. I might slow it down so those eagle-eyed people might be able to see what's wrong with it. And this was the second pass, or what ended up being the final, actually. So feel free in the comments to let me know what you see as the difference. And so this was one of the biggest things that I came across, and it was actually the liquid. And so the liquid moving, or giving the impression it's moving, because as you know, we don't have liquid sims. But as, I don't know if I use this as an example, as I kind of move this, hopefully we can see that liquid always remains level. And so that was the biggest kind of giveaway here. As this floats up, we can see it remains completely sort of on the rotational plane. And yes, to Humphrey and to Arub, yes, it is the liquid. So we can see that plane is actually staying on the same sort of plane as the bottle, the perfume bottle. But as we just saw with my glass here, it should actually remain kind of flat and level. So this was one of the biggest issues I came across. And thanks to the amazing Jonas, so Jonas Pills, who is just the wizard of everything, he showed me a very cool and relatively simple technique to get this done. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go through some of the ways that I animated. So we're going to dive into C4D now. Some of the ways that I animated, We're also going to look at some of the camera animation. And again, I mean it when I say this. This is all very, very simple techniques that are put together to create what ends up being a really nice looking animation. And so it's simple manual keyframing, which we'll do in a sec. It's the liquid moving. It's a little bit of camera animation, just some smooth stuff. And then we'll look at also a little bit of cloth simulation that we can then combine with everything together. So let's actually dive into Cinema 4D. But my idea, I know it was a little bit of talking at the beginning, but I wanted to talk a lot about what got me to this point, because I think a lot of that was kind of most of my challenges and most of my time was really doing all of these iterations and almost creating the things that I didn't like just to get ideas out and just to kind of see what worked. And I ended up thinking about the transitions between the shots and how I could animate the perfume bottle to create those transitions. So I mean by the first shot, we have the bottle coming out. If we kind of have a little look at this again. So that first shot, the bottle sort of like almost floats out of shot. And in the second shot, it then comes in from the bottom and we introduce the petals. So I think that was another thing, that is another thing that we like to think about, is the transition between our different shots, and the final shot is it coming down and the petals come down. It almost creates a little bit of a loop where we could play it again. So this is a simplified version of one of the project files. So again, link in the description, you can grab all 4 project files that are also lit, textured, and ready for Redshift as well. So yeah, let me know if you have any questions in the chat. I will keep an eye on it here whilst I am talking here. Cool, so let's talk about and break down some of the features. So we're going to start off by, like I said, some manual keyframing. And so I tried the simulation route, and when combining with the liquid fix, it didn't work. So what I came to was the conclusion of manual keyframing and manually animating the perfume bottle. And this gave me far more control and flexibility when animating. It also meant I can scrub through my timeline. And then it also meant we could do this liquid fix. So for me, it solved a lot of problems. So we have this base here. This is just the floor, and then we have the different elements of the perfume bottle. So this is what Ian modeled in last week. The only thing that I changed was I added a little bit of detail to this lid, just to have that little kind of like edge here. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how I animated this and why. So I'm going to just select all the elements of my bottle, and I'm going to go Option G again. So what we're going to do is we're going to group it inside of a null and then another null. And the reason for this is this top null is going to be my perfume bottle, and it's going to control the initial movement, the initial sort of positional and rotational movement. And then this secondary null is going to work as a controller for my banking, for my additional rotation. And I'll show you why this works in this way whilst we're kind of going through it all. So if we look at recreating this float up animation, again, you know, it's simple, but these techniques we can use in various different shots. This isn't just for a perfume bottle. This could be for anything to do with product or any kind of, you know, motion design animation. So we're going to look at the perfume bottle first, and that's where we're going to create that initial animation. So if I come into my coordinates, let's just set 150 frames. We don't need 200. That's a little bit overkill. So this is my animation timeline, and we're going to be setting up some keyframes for this perfume bottle. And so we're going to start off by just animating it going upwards. So nice and simply on frame 0. So this is where we are. We're going to set a keyframe where it currently is on the position on the Y, because the Y is the up and down. So we can set a keyframe, and then let's say at 150, we can set this to 35, and I want to make sure I set another keyframe. So now we have this really simple movement where it's just going up. That's it, nice and simple. And so then we want to create that first step of rotation. And this is going to be this kind of angle. So again, on frame 0, we're going to set a keyframe at 0 degrees, so in its initial state. And then at about 150, let's set it to about -165. And so this is why I love manual keyframe, by the way, because now I can just scrub through my timeline and I can see how this works. I don't have to worry about continually playing it through and through and through. And so if I kind of start to pull this up, if I then rotate on the H and the P, we're not quite getting the correct rotation. And so what we can do, and the reason we set this up this way, is because now I can go into my banking null, so my banking controller, to then animate some additional rotation. And so what we'll do again, we'll set a keyframe on the parameter that we want. And then maybe at 120, let's set this to 180. And now we kind of have this floating up effect. And it kind of matches the original simulation, the one that was simulated before the liquid moved, where it kind of like floats up. And that was just by animating gravity with a negative value. But now we have this keyframed version, which we have a lot more control of. And so where this is quite cool is if I open up this little option here, this is my dope sheet and emojis, apparently. We'll get rid of those. And here I can see everything that I have a keyframe for within my dope sheet. So I can see my position, my rotation, and my banking. And so what if I actually didn't want this to float and lift up straight away? What if I wanted it to pause and then do that? Well, all I need to do is grab my keyframes and I can pull them in. So I'm just clicking and dragging. So I've just clicked to drag to highlight them and I've dragged them along to frame 10. So now we have a little pause and then we're going to float away. And some other things that we can do inside of here. So this is our dope sheet where we can do a lot of fun things for our animation. So even though we have a very, very simple animation going on, we can still do some fun and interesting tricks inside of here. So let's go to my position. So my position on the y-axis is what's controlling it going up and effectively is controlling that float up. So if I then go to my F-curve preview, we then have my 2 points with an ease in and an ease out. So what I could do is I could actually just change this and just pull this handle down. And so now I have an ease in and it's going to go faster and faster and it's going to float away quicker. And so it's going to start slow on an ease and then it's going to speed up as it floats out of shot. So we can do loads of various different things with different types of interpolations here within our keyframes. But this looking curve will start slow and then speeds up until it gets to that final position on the Y. This is what's happening here. So now if we play it through, we can see we get our floating and then it's going to speed up and it's going to float away. Okay. So just a quick one for Shafi. Which file are we working on? So this is the 01 intro float up. That's the scene that we're currently working on. This is just a more simplified version for the stream. Okay, so once we've got to this point, we could then look at combining it with, again, some relatively simple camera animation. So at the moment, all we've really had to do is we've set up our rig here with our perfume bottle that's animating the original position and rotation, and our banking is allowing us to get that additional sort of correct orientation on that as well. And so let's throw in a camera. Let's set this to a slightly better focal length, and let's maybe look through it. So this is just a very simple Redshift camera here. And then let's just animate this. Here we go. Right, so let's pull that out a little bit. So we've thrown in a camera, and now let's take a look at how we can create and combine some simple animation with this. And so what we're going to do, we're going to build it up. So we're going to start off with this shot, and then we're going to look at one of the other shots, which is the close-up one with the petals sort of flying around, and then the camera moves around the perfume bottle. So those are the two that we'll probably have time to look at today, as well as the liquid technique. So we have our Redshift camera inside of here. And what I wanted to do was, as the perfume bottle floats up, I wanted the camera to move in and then follow it upwards. But again, I needed to think about the transition. So I wanted the perfume bottle to float slightly out of shot. And so then on shot 2, we could have it come in through the bottom, right? That's kind of we've got to think about those transitions like we would with video editing. So the easiest way that we can have my camera point at my object is the exact same way that I do my lighting. And that is within our animation tags. We'll take a look at a couple of these later, but the target tag. And within here, we can choose a target object. So you're probably thinking, okay, cool, we can throw in that perfume bottle. And so now when we press play, that camera is going to follow that perfume bottle. And already it's starting to look quite nice because it's doing that animation for us. So because we've set up our manual keyframing already, we've animated our perfume bottle, all we've had to do now is throw the target tag on, and the camera animates automatically itself. But again, we're thinking about the transition. The trouble is, no matter how high my bottle goes, it's never going to float out of shot because we're always targeting that perfume bottle. So the center of my camera will always be in the axis center of that object, which in our case is this middle section. So for this, what we can do, instead of actually targeting the perfume bottle, the way that we can add more flexibility and control is by creating another null, and this is going to be our camera target. And we're going to replace the perfume bottle and then just move our camera target up so we get that correct focus, that correct start point. And we could even come into our object. So if you ever want to be able to see a null quite clearly, within it, you can just go to the shape and you could maybe choose a pyramid, maybe make it a little bit smaller, and then change the color. So now we have this null here. We could even, I don't know, we could even like move it in front if we wanted to. But we can see we have this in here. And so now wherever I move the camera target, the camera is going to focus on it. So what we could do is we could then animate this camera, this null, something a little bit like this, maybe a little bit higher, something perhaps 15. Let's try that. And so as it comes in, we still then create that transition. So I'm following the perfume bottle to a point, but then as my camera null stops, the float of the perfume bottle is going to continue, and we're going to create that initial transition of the perfume bottle going out of shot. And again, what we might want to do is, because remember our perfume bottle doesn't move until frame 10, we could come in and we could just say, okay, actually, let's move this, just these ones, to frame 10 as well. Inside of here. Okay, so we've had a quick question asking to explain the camera target again. So basically what we've done is on the Redshift camera, so we've created ourselves a camera here, just created a camera, and then we've right-click, animation, and target. And so we've added a target tag. And so what happens is when we add a target tag, whatever we put as the target object, in our case, we added a null object here that we called the camera target, put that in there. Wherever I move that camera target now, that null object, my camera is always going to focus on it. And so that's what we've done. And then we animated the null. And so then we still had that float out as well. So this is what we've created so far, this kind of float out within here. And then we could just add a final little bit of manual animation here of a little bit of a zoom in. So we could start a little bit further out on the position of the Z axis. So this is what's kind of going to allow us to create a bit of a zoom or a pan in and out on our camera. So let's maybe set a keyframe here. And then on frame 20, let's get a little bit closer. So now we're kind of panning in and up. So if I come out of here, let me just show you what this camera is doing. So it's moving in and it's looking up. So this is, one of the upsides of manual keyframing is we have a lot of flexibility, a lot of control. I can come in, I can tweak within my dope sheet, I can move these things around, and I can scrub within my timeline and see exactly how this animation is looking. And so I found this far more flexible. So even though it takes a little bit more time to set up than simulation does, I found this far more easy to control. And it did end up saving me more time in the long run than having to worry about, creating a simulation, playing it through, checking it, caching it, etc. So with this done, we can take this scene as it is, and we can talk about that liquid movement and that liquid animation. And so the original one I created animation, and it looked off. Like you guys saw it in After Effects. It just doesn't look as good as when it moves. So yeah, the amazing Jonas showed me how to do this. So I have to shout him out. This is absolutely not my technique. I am just claiming it as my own and teaching it on this live stream. Cool. Yeah. So let's actually take this as it is, and we'll create it using this actual scene. So what we're going to do is, the first thing we need to do is we actually want to create our own version of the liquid, because we need it to be able to fill the whole inside of the bottle. So if you imagine, I haven't got anything, I should have had a perfume bottle here. So imagine I had a perfume bottle and I turn it upside down. It would also fill like that little area in the middle as well. So if I actually hide the lid, for example, it would fill this kind of inner glass area, right? Whereas at the moment, the liquid that we have looks like this. Perfect for a still, great for a still, but we're animating, so we need to make sure it does too. So what we're going to do is we're going to solo. If anyone's wondering how I'm doing this, by the way, this little button up here actually will solo the object you have selected, which is really handy. So we can just see we have this object. So this is the glass bottle. So really, we know the liquid would fill the inside of this glass bottle. Tomorrow, we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the rules of liquid and refraction. But for now, we'll keep this with C4D animation. And tomorrow, we'll talk a little bit more about those rules. What we can do is we can actually steal the inside of this bottle. So if I go into my Polygon selections on my glass bottle, I can go UL. It's going to give me a loop selection. I can take this little outer edge, or this little inner edge, sorry. I can go to select, fill selection, and I can take that selection. So now I just have the inside of the bottle, effectively what could and would be the liquid. I can right click, I can split this off, and then I'm just going to solo this now. So now you can see we have that inside that we've taken away from that glass bottle. So let's close the polygon hole by right click and going to close polygon hole. I can click to close it, and I can do basic, I can do grid, and I can do patch. You can see how, I don't know how new this feature is, but I came across it relatively recently. You can see how it adds some sort of nice topology and some subdivisions for you on this, what would be a single engon. So we have this inside, right? I'm just going to select everything, because you're probably wondering, it's looking a little bit strange. And so at the moment, all my polygons, because I've taken the inside of the bottle, are all facing inside. But because of this is going to become my liquid, I need my polygons to actually be facing outwards, like they would be if I'd modeled this from scratch. My polygons would probably be facing outwards. And this is really, really key. This is a really key takeaway for when it comes to rendering glass and liquids inside of glass. We need to make sure our normals, which is the direction that polygons face, are facing the correct way. And so when they're blue, bluey purple, this means they're facing inside. So I'm seeing the back of the polygon right now. So if I select them all, right click and reverse normals, they then become that kind of orangey yellow color. And this is now correct because now they're facing out towards us. So that was just by selecting them all, Command or Control A, we'll select all your polygons in polygon mode, and then we just right click, reverse normals. Okay, so this, let's pull this out of here. This is now our liquid new. So we've created our liquid here, right? And the way that this technique works is it just uses the Legacy Bool generator. So recently we updated the Boole generator, the Boolean, which is fantastic. It's great and it is wonderful. But in this case, we actually want the more simple, the better. And when we look at animating, we want things to be as fast as possible. And I'm going to be real with you. The new Boolean generator, because it's far more advanced and it can do many more things, for this method, it actually was far slower than using the legacy. And so the way that you can find the Legacy Bool generator is you go Shift-C, and it knows I've been talking about it. No, I've already searched this earlier. But we can just type in Boole, and we have Legacy Bool. So if I just double click that, we have the Legacy Bool. And so what we need to do, we need to take an object, and we're going to use that to create the level. And so we're going to have our perfume bottle, and then we're going to have an object that's going to cut off the top, and then we're going to use that to control the level. So nice and simply, we're going to use a cube because it's Cinema 4D. So let's grab ourselves a cube, and let's just adjust this to be a little bit smaller. So perhaps something like this. And let's just reposition this cube, something like this. So we can see how it's going to cut off the top of this perfume bowl, or the liquid effectively. It's the liquid. What we're going to do is we're going to drop, so this is going to be our level. We're going to drop them both into my Boole. And my Boole, what we want to do is we want to just disable all of this. And then let's just make sure it's the correct way around. So we want to disable all of this inside of here, and we want object A to subtract object B. So object A is the first one, the first child. So the liquid subtract object B, which is the second one, the cube, And you can see here, we now have this effect. So really quickly, I'm just kind of like keeping an eye on the questions as I'm kind of going. So Chris is wondering why use a Legacy Bool. So the reason why is actually it ended up being faster. So the new Boole generator, Boolean generator, allows you to do loads of really cool, advanced different things, Boole and subtract and add and intersect multiple objects together. So it's more powerful. But of course, then because it's more powerful, it's heavier to use. Whereas all we really want is we want to cut one thing from another thing so we can use the legacy version and we can switch off high quality. So it just gives us a really simple shape. And then when we animate it, it's fast. So in my experience, I had no lag with this. This is when it does it in the live stream, but I had no lag, whereas with the other method, I did. It slowed it down. So yeah, hopefully that helps. Okay, cool. So this is what we've set up, that Legacy Bool. And now if I kind of come in and I just kind of rotate this cube, we can see that we're able to create that impression of the liquid level changing. And so remember, this is not a liquid simulation. So if you're looking for, you know, that beautiful liquid moving within the perfume bottle, this absolutely is not that technique. That would be amazing. And at some point in the future, I'm sure I will be creating that for you all. But as of right now, it was a case of making it look as good as possible with as simple techniques as possible. So the idea was, as the perfume bottle goes up, we just want the level to remain consistent and not rotate with the perfume bottle. That's the idea behind this. So here we go. This is what we have so far. So let me just unsolo this and let's just get this to a point where we can see it. So I'm going to hide the original liquid. So this was liquid old. And then the glass bottle, let me just X-ray that. Cool. So now we can see the new liquid. So this is the new liquid that we can see within here. So this is step one. So step one is creating the actual rig, effectively, that cuts off the liquid, right? And then the cube is what is leveling it out. The thing is, now when you press play, liquid doesn't move. The liquid doesn't move. That's fine. That's what we expected. And so what we can do now is we can actually use some clever tags to link the liquid and the cube with the different elements that we just manually keyframed. And again, I don't think, or I'm pretty sure this setup doesn't work with simulation. And you'll see why in a sec, because we have to constrain things together. And so those of you who are wondering perhaps why we go the manual keyframing route, where we hand animated the perfume bowl, versus simulation, is so we can do this method. That is exactly why we do it. So how do we link these two things together? The way that we do it is we use something called a constraint tag. And that's used a lot inside of rigging. But what we can do is we can set up our own little kind of like handy liquid rig here. So what we need to do, we need to constrain the liquid and the cube to the animating elements, which are our perfume bottle and our banking. So what we need to do on the liquid, we're going to right click, and under our rigging tags, we should have a constraint tag. So we'll take the constraint tag, and what we need to do is we need to parent it. So we need to parent it to the banking. And we're then going to say, okay, so the position and the rotation of the banking, wherever that goes, whatever that does, liquid, please can you follow and do the same, right? So at the moment, it isn't. It's just static. So we're going to parent to the banking, and we're going to keep the position and the rotation enabled. So now when we press play, you can see that the liquid is staying, so it is moving, the liquid is moving, it's staying within the bottle. But now what's happening is it looks like it's kind of, you know, it's emptying. And the reason for that is because the cube also needs to be constrained. But this time we just need to constrain a transform on the y-axis, because if the cube moves and rotates, we'll get the same effect that we had the first time, where the liquid doesn't remain level. So if the cube, which is cutting off so if we say the cube's cutting off our liquid, if the cube rotates with the liquid, we don't get the level plane. But if this remains level and this moves, we're going to create that effect. So this is why we need to go to the cube. We go into our rigging tags, and again, we want to constrain it. But this time, we want to constrain it based on just a transform. This is a key point. We want to maintain the original position. So we want to enable and maintain the original position. And then we want to transform to the perfume bottle only on the position, so not on the rotation. And so now what this will do is the cube will follow the position of the perfume bottle wherever it goes. And as we know, as we sort of did however long ago, whether that was 20 minutes ago, when we manually keyframed it, we can see now it will follow, and you can see how, if we come out of here, we can see how that liquid is always going to remain level. So one cool thing about this is if you want to come in here and you want to do a quick adjust of the cube, so let's say I wanted to have less liquid in here, but I didn't want to have to worry about going through and animating or moving anything. Well, within our constraint tag on our cube, we can actually offset the position on the X, Y, and Z axis. So if I wanted to have less liquid, I could just manually offset that cube. And so now I've set it to a -2 value. So now you can see we have what looks like less liquid. And it's still then going to animate correctly. And it's still then going to remain level. So that's how we can set up that liquid move, by using our manual keyframing on our perfume bottle and banking, and then constraining this trick here, which is just the liquid that we stole from the inside of the bottle, and then that cube, really simple, just a big cube that is subtracting from that liquid to create that kind of effect. Okay, cool. Don't forget to let me know if you have any questions on anything. But for now, let's move on, because we've got a little bit of time left. Let's move on to creating something with a little bit of, a little bit of cloth simulation, right? Wouldn't be me without some kind of simulation. So let's go in and let's just steal all of these elements again and paste these in here. Okay. So let's go switch off our work plane, hide our materials, and let's just leave that on for now. Switch that. Here we go. Cool. So again, we're looking at a simplified version of the third shot, which if we take a little look again back in, let's go back into After Effects and let's have a little look. So this third shot was, or this second shot, sorry, was this one here, where we have these kind of flower petals floating around in a little bit of a spiral, interacting with our perfume bottle that again is just manually keyframed through. And we have this kind of this movement here where the camera is actually moving around. And then we have kind of this, this is the one where the camera is moving around. And this is the one where the bottle is rotating. But again, very similar techniques that we've just looked at. So let's head over and look at how we can create this style setup. So first of all, we can just bring this in here. So what I will do is, for ease, I'm just going to keep this under a single null. But what we'd do is if we want to do that liquid setup and that movement, we'd need to make sure that we do this in the same way. So banking and then perfume bottle. And so let's just do a very simple animation. So let's go to 150 frames and then let's just animate the bottle from bottom to top. So we can set a keyframe again on the y-axis, and then let's go to 150 and then let's move that up. So we just have this, again, very, very simple animation. And then what we'll do is let's set up our cloth or our petal, our flower petal simulation. And so we're going to take our petals. And so these are also inside the project file. These are actually something that I also asked Ian to model for me because I thought it would be interesting to have some extra elements, floating around our scene. In a lot of these, product ads, there tends to be some kind of additional element. So in our case, we're looking at a perfume bottle. So we have petals. If you have, I don't know, like sweet packaging, you might have some of the sweets floating around. If you're doing a soda can for a fruit juice, you might have the different elements of fruit segments flying around. A lot of that is very kind of common in 3D motion design. We have these extra little elements that we can just simulate and animate around our scene to create just an extra eye-catching movement. So the way that we can set this up is we're going to do a very simple MoGraph setup. And this is just going to allow me to position petals surrounding my perfume bottle. So that's going to be their starting position, their starting state. And then we can use simulation and we can use forces to animate those around my manually keyframed perfume bottle. So let's grab ourselves a cloner and let's take the flower petals and let's drop those into our cloner. And what we can do is, I'm trying to remember what I did here. This might not be exactly the same as the final, but it will be pretty close. We'll do a 4x5x3 grid. And if I just make this smaller, you'll be able to see what exactly is happening. So let's maybe do something like this. So we can see we have a 4x5x3 grid of our little flower petals. And at the moment, they look very uniform, don't they? They look very sort of structured and organized. Two things I am not. So what we can do is let's add some randomness. Let's add some craziness. A bit more my kind of style. Let's throw these around a little bit. So with the cloner selected, we can come in to our effectors. Effectors basically allow us to affect and change our MoGraph cloned geometry based on a series of parameters and formulas. So if I take the random effector, what it does is it randomly distributes on the position X, Y, and Z axis my clones up to a value of 50 centimeters. Disclaimer, this is built to scale. So everything is relatively small within my scene. So what that means is these default values are probably needing to be a little bit smaller. So now we kind of have these moved around. We could add some rotation by just enabling some rotation here and just kind of pushing these around, something like this, maybe a little bit of uniform scaling so they're not all the exact same size. So we have something a bit like this, but you're probably noticing, or you will notice when you use the random effector, is it doesn't really have any consideration for where the other clones are. It will overlap and it will intersect. And that's just what it will do because it's randomly distributing on that position, scale, and rotation. In our case, because we want to animate them and we want them to eventually be simulated, as we know, having and starting with intersections is going to cause issues and errors when simulating. Because normally what happens if we have sort of like two things, they collide, they'll bounce off each other. Whereas if they're already intersecting, they're just going to cause problems. They're not going to be able to see one another because they've already started within sort of like in this intersection. So what we can do is with our cloner selected again, we can kind of grab a second effector, which is a push apart effector. And again, our default sizing is a little bit extreme. So let's just put that to 1. And then let's find what we're doing is we're increasing it to see when this no longer intersects. So something like this looks pretty good. Looks fine. There we go. So we now have no intersections going on. We've created this. We could even make them a little bit further wider if we wanted to. So we've distributed these petals around, and this is going to become the starting position of them for our simulation. And now what we're going to do is we're going to just simulate them. And so when we're working with MoGraph and we're working with simulation, what we have to do is we actually have to add our simulation tag to the cloner itself, not to the individual objects. So what we're going to do is this is going to become a cloth simulation because each of these petals, we want them to move around. We want them to sort of like bend and fold in, sort of like a real petal would. And so this is where simulation, this is why I love simulation, because not only is it like quick and easy, but we can get some more realistic movements. And so if I was going to manually animate each petal around and together, it would take me a long time and it wouldn't look as realistic. Whereas for this, all we really have to do is we can add a cloth tag to our cloner. If we press play, everything will fall down because it's now being affected by the forces within our scene, which is gravity by default. We can press Command or Control D, and this opens up your simulation settings or your scene settings. And so we can see we have gravity here. I'm actually just going to remove that. We don't want any gravity. We want to control the movement ourselves based on forces. So we're going to get rid of the gravity. And a few more things that I want to talk about inside of here before we then add a force is timescale and scene scale. Two very, very important settings. Scene scale is looking at the approximate scale of the simulated objects in your scene, and it's going to be basing and looking at the forces and the constraints and sort of controlling them based on this scene scale. And so as we already sort of said and talked about, these are a lot smaller. So each of these petals is roughly 5 centimeters. So what we want to do is we just want to say, okay, our simulated scene scale is about 5 centimeters. We want to pull that down. And so let's actually add some movement now, because as I play this through, we can see nothing happens. And that's because nothing is actually controlling the movement. There are no physics, there are no forces, there is nothing within my scene moving my cloth petals around. So within our simulate menu, under our forces, we can find various different forces that do various different things. The coolest and easiest one to use is turbulence. So if I take the turbulence and then let's just add a little bit of scale and play this through, we now have these animated. So you can see here, because these are very, very small, these values are actually having a very big impact. So if I just wanted it to be this nice, smooth movement, so again, we're thinking back to that, the Perfume ad, we're thinking back to that client brief of the mood and the aesthetic that they wanted, which was sort of that smooth effect, that clean effect, that elegant feeling of sort of that nice sort of like silky cloth. And so we're thinking of our petals in a cloth sense. So let's just pull this down. And now let's play this again. So we can now see that we're getting this type of movement. And the scale here is the scale of the turbulent noise. So you can really see how different this looks. If I increase this scale to something like 50%, it almost moves the entire setup as a whole. And that's because the noise turbulent pattern is larger. Whereas if I want to have more intricate turbulent detail affecting each of my individual petals, I know I need a much smaller scale noise pattern or turbulence pattern in order to allow that. Okay, so we're getting closer. A couple of little extra things that I want to talk about is back in my project settings, like we said, we sort of have this gravity, we have this scene scale, and we also have this time scale. This time scale is very, very cool. And I love messing with it quite a lot and animating it a lot. Effectively, a value of 1 is going to play my simulation. So remember, we're in our simulation scene settings. It's going to play my simulation at 100% speed. If I pull this down to 0.5, it's going to play my simulation at 50% speed, helping me get that nice, smooth motion within here without having to worry about keyframing anything. So now we can see we get that smoother style effect. We can also go into our simulation settings. And again, there's various tutorials online, loads on the Maxon Training Team YouTube channel that goes through simulation in a lot more detail. But really what we can do is we can increase the sub-steps to increase the accuracy of our simulation, can also affect rigidity of our cloth. We can then add damping. Damping works to remove and reduce the kinetic energy within our simulation. So it gives the impression of things slowing down, and some people describe it as animating underwater. That's sort of the effect that it gives. So if we add a few more elements to this, replay that, we can now see we're getting a much smoother simulation. So within our constraints, again, you know, various tutorials that go through these different things. The bendiness is going to be the rigidity of our petals. So we could actually set that to 1. And so we don't have too much of it folding in on itself. Or we could set that to, you know, different values if we wanted to have more or less bend or rigidity on our scene. So some other things I actually did, and that was a trick that I like to do very much, is using a spline and a field force to control the direction of simulated objects. It allows us to art direct objects within our scene. And so what we can do is we can come in, and for ease, let's just grab ourselves a helix and let's just shrink this down. And let's start with a radius of 0. We'll leave this end radius on 13. And then let's make it a little bit taller. Maybe a little bit like this. And then have some more of our, have some more angle on here. So let me just do that. Something like this. There we go. And what we can do is we can tell Cinema 4D, or we can tell our simulated objects, our simulated petals, hey, can you please base your movement now on this helix, on this spiral? Can we create a little bit of a rotational movement as well as the turbulent movement? And so the way that we can do this is I'm going to switch off my turbulence just to show you exactly what's happening. Is we'll press play. Nothing's happening. We've turned off turbulence. What we need is a field force. And so in various tutorials I've talked about this, but I love this setup. It's so like transferable and sort of directable. And so the field force is going to control the movement. So we can drop the helix, which is going to be that direction that is going to control the movement. And then if I just sort of come into here and come into here, we can see these little lines. And if I just go to my display, these are my vectors. And the vectors at the moment are controlling the velocity. And the velocity is what is going to control the movement of my petals, my simulated objects. If I increase my strength, you'll see that those lines actually get longer. So it's a visual representation of the strength and the direction. So we can see here, we're getting that spiral because it's following the helix, and we're getting longer lines up here and smaller lines down here. And this is because it actually is looking at the helix as a gradient. So the starting point of my helix has effectively 0 strength, and the end of my helix has 100% strength, which is currently 18. But what I want to do is I want to have the same amount of strength throughout the entirety of my force. And all we need to do for that is we go into the helix, and in the offset, we just set that to 100. That's all we have to do. And now you can see we have the same length lines or same length vectors all around here. Let's switch that off. And so now if we press play, we can see that we're getting this spiral effect. If we find this is a little bit too uniform, we can add, if I bring my display back on, we can add a random field. And so you'll now see that we're actually slightly randomizing those vectors a little bit. So let's maybe make this 15 and switch that off. And so now what we get is a little bit of additional sort of movement here. And we could even, you know, we could even like animate this. So now the random field noise is animating as well. And then don't forget, we can still turn back on our turbulence. So we have the two effects working together, just for a little bit more of a bit more control on our cloth simulation that isn't just, you know, adding turbulence and letting it kind of doing its thing. We have a little bit more control and say about where our petals are moving and how they're moving. So really quickly, let's just bring back our perfume bottle, right? Because that's the whole point. We've got this perfume bottle that moves. Maybe let's just move this up. So we have our perfume bottle that moves, and now we want this to interact with our petals. That's the whole idea behind this. But first of all, we have a couple of issues. So as we can see, we already have an intersection here on this petal and on this petal. And so what we can do, and what I like to do sometimes, is within my random, so remember my random effector is randomly repositioning my petals. I sometimes come in to the seed value and I just randomly iterate. Just randomly iterate and just kind of play it through and see which ones I think look nicest. And I do this quite a lot, and I did this quite a lot in the final, especially when I had my camera animation set up. I changed this seed value and played it through to see until I found a shot that I was happy with. But what happens is you can't always prevent these intersections, because the push apart is looking at the petals, it's not looking at the bottle. And so a little tip for you, an extra little trick for you, is we can actually create a MoGraph selection, and then we can move any of the petals that are causing issues, or we can just get rid of them entirely. So if my clone is selected, we go to MoGraph selection, and then we can just see each one has this little dot on it. We can highlight this dot, and then we can shift click to create and add to our selection. And so let me just double check there are no more. There are no more issues, no more issues. Nope. So is this one intersecting? No. So these are the two that I'm having a problem with. So I've got them both selected, and we can see we now have our MoGraph selection here. And then I'm just going to take a plane effector. And my plane effector is just going to be moving these two petals. So we can see these are the two. So if I switch it off and switch it on, and so these are going to be our bad petals. And then they're still going to work correctly. So we still have that animation working correctly. We've just, Arco says, save the file, please. And this is how I normally live on the edge. What would we call this? Petal demo. I normally live like this. Keeps me on my toes. So there you go, saved for you, Marco. Yeah, so we can get rid of those. So the plane is now getting rid of those, and we can see how it's still animating correctly. The only final thing we might want to do, actually, that we'll definitely want to do, is because we have this animating through, what we can see here is we're actually getting some intersections. And that's because we've manually keyframed and animated the perfume bottle, but we need to set up our collisions. And so the way that we do that is we can just look at which part of my object is on the outside, and that is my liquid and my glass bottle. And so I can right click and I can make sure I set some collisions here. So we have no bounce and a little bit of friction. And this just means that now when this comes through, it should interact like we can see here, especially we can see it interact with that petal. And this was sort of the general sort of concept behind that close-up shot and also that second shot with the petals flying around. The only additional part of that really was the camera movement. And for that, I ended up taking an arc, so an arc spline, and let's just rotate this down. So we'll do this really quickly. So to nobody's surprise, we have overrun past the hour. You're all shocked, I'm sure. But we'll finish this off. We'll do these, and then we'll talk a little bit more about what's happening tomorrow. So we have our arc spline here. And again, this is going to be for our camera movement and camera animation. And so again, another relatively simple technique that just looks great and is easy to control and is flexible. And when we combine all these things together, we can see, based on the final animation, they look really smooth and look really sort of like clean and crisp together. So this is our arc. So this is our arc spline. Hopefully we can see it here within the stream. And what we're going to do is we're going to use this, and it's going to be the path that our camera is going to follow. And so let's just create a camera. Again, let's just set that to about a roughly 120 focal length. I think I had between 120 and 180 for the different shots. And what we can do is we can align this camera onto this spline, this path. So if we go back into our animation tag, so remember this is where our target tag was, and we can do align to spline, and then our spline path is asking for that path. So that's going to be our arc. And then all we need to do is, again, we can target the camera, and let's just create a null. And this null is just going to be in the center of everything. And let's drop that in there. So again, let's just make sure we call this camera target, just so everything's a bit more organized. And so this is kind of what we have at the moment. So this is what we've set up. So perhaps we could even, angle this slightly, just so it looks a bit more interesting. So I've angled the camera, and this is what we have, this animation. And so you might find if it's a little bit too close or a little bit too far away, remember it's the arc that is defining where the camera is. So if I move the arc, it's going to move the camera. So make sure if you come into your camera and everything's like either really close or really far away or not organized correctly, just go into the arc. That's the path that it's on, and then just adjust that. And then from here, this setup, the reason we love the setup is we can come into here and we can actually control the position that the camera is on the arc. So not only have we set up the perfume bottle movement, again, really simple. All we did was we animated the y-axis. So the perfume bottle goes up, that's it. Then we set up our petal simulation, which looked at a little bit of a MoGraph setup, a little bit of turbulence, and that field force and that helix again to control a little bit more of, you know, the art direction and the movement of our petals. And then let's do a little bit of animation inside of here. So we've set 2 keyframes on our camera. And so now as we kind of look through, this is kind of what we have going on. And the camera is kind of moving around. Maybe you could even pull that down just so you can see that happening a little bit quicker. Okay, so let's kind of like come back inside of here. So there's a couple of final things I want to talk about. Seeing as we've overrun, we may as well overrun and finish everything off. So a few things I want to talk about. So again, this is the final. So we've just already looked at this entire concept here where we created that float up effect, that manual keyframing. We then looked at how we can make that liquid kind of stay in line and stay level as it should. We then looked at this type of setup where, again, the perfume bottle is just manually keyframed. So a lot of these techniques are repetition for these different shots. And it was just thinking about the transitions between the two. So we can see how this one floats out. And then the second shot, it sort of comes from the underneath. And then we incorporate the petals. We looked at how we can create the petal simulation. And then it kind of like flies off again. And then this is a little trick. I wanted to have 4 shots because I didn't have a lot of time to create this, especially with all kind of like the other challenges that I came across while I was doing it. And so then what I did, I took this shot, I duplicated the scene file, I then got rid of the perfume movement, and then I just, so you can see it's the same thing. It's the same scene. I just cheated a little bit. So yeah, I got rid of the perfume animation movement and then just did a close-up shot and I panned around it. So it's the exact same scene file, just with no perfume movement, but with more camera movement. And the final one is a similar kind of effect to the first one, but this time we're animating it floating down back onto that base. And then what we have is that same petal simulation, but instead of it being controlled by the field force, we actually just have gravity and we slow everything down. So we make sure that time scale is slowed down. We make sure you have damping in there. And then they just float down with a little bit of turbulence until they kind of come out of this shot. And so before we talk about what we'll be covering tomorrow, is I want to talk about creating an animatic. And this saved me here. This saved me whilst trying to create this. As you already saw, I showed some of the, not usable content and animations that was just great for me to get out the ideas. As you can imagine, though, when you're rendering glass, you're rendering simulation, you're rendering just refraction and everything like that, it takes a long time to render sometimes, especially when we look at animation. So animatics are a lifesaver. And so if I go through here we go. This is the animatic that I created. Basically, it is just a very, very simplified version. And all it looks at is the animation. We don't look at any lighting, any texturing, any sort of advanced stuff we're not looking at. It is purely the animation. And so you can see here, it is the way that I was able to check and test my animations and actually end up with a final simplified animation that then matches the final like this. And the way that we can do that inside of Cinema 4D is, so what's the simple one? Let's go with this one. So this is kind of our animation that we have here. And so maybe we don't even need, you know what, we don't even need this. We don't even need this. We'll just bring this one back and bring this one back. So let's look through here. And let's say we wanted a animatic of this. Come into our render settings. We go to Viewport Renderer. Within our Viewport Renderer, we don't want any effects. We want only to be seeing our geometry. We then want to make sure we save this. And so all I'm going to do is let's just do test animatic. We can do a movie file or an MP4. And then ensure you define your output and then your frame range. So let's just do all frames. So 0 to 150 frames. So this is going to give me a really, really basic, just viewport render of my animation. But the power is how quick it is. So let's do a quick render. And the reason I'm doing this on stream is to show you how fast this is. And so you can see within a matter of 10 seconds, I have created my animatic. So if I now go back into, where did we save this? This is animatic. No, maybe not. See, this is why you need to be organized, unlike me. Let's just play it through here instead. So here we go. We have our super fast 10-second animatic that allows you to do a final render to test the animation, but it's not going to take you ages and ages. And this is what I did. I was doing animatic after animatic, just viewport render after viewport render, just to test exactly how things looked. And then this is the one that I actually ended up editing and putting together. So whilst I was, finalizing my finals and actually rendering them out, I was then doing this. And a lot of people are sort of talking about takes and render tokens and stuff like that. Yes, absolutely. You could use the take system if you wanted to. I set these up as 4 separate scene files or 3 separate scene files, just because I was working on them as I was also trying to kind of edit and render them as I was going. Okay, cool. So let me know if there are any questions. In the meantime, we've got a couple of minutes and then we'll wrap this up. I want to talk about tomorrow's session where we're going to be diving into Redshift and we're going to be breaking down the lighting, texturing, and rendering of this. And the concepts are going to be the same. It's near on impossible to break down this entire project over 2 hours. So the animation and the lighting, texturing, and rendering in 2 hours. But the same as today, we looked at breaking down the most important tips and tricks. And then again, the stuff is just repeated. We're going to do the same tomorrow. So the focus mostly will be on creating the glass and the liquid refractions. So looking at the lighting tips and tricks, looking at how we can create nice looking glass, better refraction. So looking at trace depths to create that accuracy. We're also going to look at glass and liquid refraction rules. So what are called nested dielectrics. So we're going to look at those rules and how we can spot things that don't look right. So that's going to be the key kind of takeaway for tomorrow. And then we're also going to look a little bit at optimization. So I know a lot of people talk about, rendering refraction and glass can take a lot of time. We're going to look a little bit at optimization and I'm going to show you what I did to create faster renders. But again, this stuff does unfortunately take a little bit longer to render, especially if we're rendering at 4K and we're trying to get that accuracy as well. So I guess we can wrap it up there. And don't forget, it's tomorrow that's the Redshift session. So normally what we do is there every single week, but actually because we have had less weeks to do Creative Maxon in April, yeah, we're streaming today and tomorrow. And then next week, Max is going to be diving into color grading. So this is my final version. I just did a very, very simple color grade in Red Giant, Magic Will It Looks. But what he's going to do, he's going to take the original final out of Cinema 4D and Redshift. He's going to do his own grade on it, which is going to be great. So that'll be next week. But in the meantime, if you have any questions for me, then please drop me a DM on Instagram. I am at @itwaselly. I think my little thing is down here. If you want the project files, you can find them in a link to the description. This video was recorded and it will be uploaded onto the Maxon Trainer Team YouTube channel with the amazing Dr. Sassy timestamping that. So shout out and thanks to Dr. Sassy for doing that. And as always, have a great rest of your week, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Hope you all enjoyed it. And I will see you, hopefully I will see all of you tomorrow for the Redshift session. Bye, everyone. See you then.